Today I'm going to be doing a video book review on Aldrich's Unschooling Rules, and he focuses on 7 C's of education, and I will tell you about these shortly. And the whole book in itself is really defined around his first rule, and I think all of education can be defined around the first rule. His first rule is learn to be, learn to do, and learn to know. He talks about learning to know is really what today's traditional schools are very good at, but it's the learning to be and the learning to do that traditional schools really fail at. And I think it's something that traditional education tends to think that your parents and or your grandparents have taught you how to be and do. So Mr. Aldrich's book is really centered around the 4 C's of education. I'm sorry, the 7 C's of education. The first is curricula, which is the selection of the material. The second is content, which is the pieces of the material you're going to use. Third is coaching, which is the teacher or the adult. Fourth is customization, which is your flexibility about teaching. Fourth is community, which is your peers and other teachers, your principal. Sixth is credit, which is your documentation, the things you're using for documentation. And 7 is the care, the place in which you're teaching. So Mr. Aldrich argues that there are 25 critical skills that should be essential to any high school curriculum, which is what I would like to teach. And he talks about these skills as being ethical behavior, leadership, conflict management, problem solving, negotiation, and communications. He thinks that if these things were implemented in today's high school curriculum, that it would set forth an impact on today's business world. Aldrich also argues about the PBL. I know it's not really, he doesn't really talk about it as being a project-based learning, but I really think that's what it is. He talks about exposing the kids, the students, more and teaching them less. He says that we all need to unschool to learn most of our knowledge. The variables are how well we do it and when we start. So rather than teaching more lessons in a classroom that help students learn only how to be students in classrooms, we should find ways to use technology, the natural world, internships, and microcosms like fish tanks, lemonade stands, team sports to help students learn. He says the key to this approach is finding time for reflection both before and after the learning activities take place, and finding ways to explore the world around you. You need to talk and observe experts, and this will help nurture a child's or student's interest, and it leads to the student learning what their passion is. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do as teachers. We're trying to find out what motivates our students and then steer them into that direction for a career path or even a learning path. So the thing is, he focuses also on the fact that adults have to learn how to do this. It's what he calls a new model of learning. He says that students, children, usually look to adults as role models, and adults should accept that responsibility. We need to act accordingly, and we need to find ways to nurture our relationships with our students so that they can blossom and we can provide them with good mentorships. The one thing that I really appreciate about this book is that it doesn't start off with the premise that, school is broke, let me fix it for you. He doesn't really start off with that. Even though the book is geared towards homeschooling, I can now see what my friends said when they said, look, you can take some of what he said and you can implement it in your classroom. And I feel like that's essentially what we've done in EDM 510, is that we've learned more about project-based learning, and I think this is what his Unschooling Rules is about. So Mr. Aldrich does not make an attempt to convince you that what we view as a normal education is best. He doesn't try to convince you that, traditional schooling is a better practice than homeschooling, or that homeschooling is a better practice than traditional schooling. He doesn't argue over homeschooling versus public or private schooling. He essentially argues that you need to have a choice and you need to learn how to speak with your child and your students. So, um, it's kind of short. It has really short chapters and it's easy to read. I actually read it at the beach last week while my daughter and I were on spring break. So, although it takes just a short time to read it, I found myself even this week going back over it because I was like, oh, what did he say about this? What did he say about that? And it's just really one of those books that I'll continue to go back to time and again. And I just want to read you a little quote that is in the afterwards of the book, and I think it really sums up the book as a whole. He says the paradigm that children are widgets, little more than raw material for a conveyor belt education designed to shape and for them is misguided. It is a system that is as morally flawed as it is ineffective. And I think today's education system is flawed. And I think we've gotten away from knowing that children and students learn by doing. They learn by making mistakes, and they learn by having others teach them, others being themselves and their peers. School in itself is really, or Aldrich argues that school is kind of a new experiment. And if you think about it, I know my great grandparents did not attend school for 12 years like our kids do now. I mean, my daughter attended school for 13 years, and some students now attend school for 14 years. They start in 3-year-old kindergarten and they graduate from high school, and then sometimes they have education that can last 4, 6, or 8 years after that. But it's still new. It keeps compounding. It keeps expanding. But it's also all outdated. And it doesn't always work for every kid, and it's not working for a lot of kids today. So what Aldrich does is he gives some guidelines about what we need to think about education now. Some of the things that I feel are really important to mention are the 55 guidelines. And I know I don't get it all right now. I'm a new teacher, and I'm sure I'm not going to get everything right now or next week or next year. And it's probably going to take multiple years for me to fully get what Mr. Aldrich is saying and how I can apply it in my classroom. I know it's not easy to go with this type of learning environment, but I do believe that it will be worth it in the long run. Sometimes as busy teachers, and some of us will have, 25 students, the same students all day long every day, and a lower school, in middle and upper schools, you'll have anywhere from 130 to 170 kids every day, and then they'll change at the semester. So sometimes it can be really easy just to throw out a worksheet or some kind of prepackaged curriculum, but I think our students are really worth putting in the extra time to really do a little more hands-on work. And I'm going to point out a few things that you'll definitely get from this book. He talks about why animals are better than books about animals. He talks about what a person in a classroom learns. Okay, so what a person in a classroom learns is how to be a person in a classroom. They don't learn how to be. They just learn how to be a person sitting in a classroom. And I don't think that's what we want out of our kids and out of our students. We want them to learn to be, to think. I know I tell my students consistently, I don't want to tell me what I know because I already know it. I want to know what you know. I want to know what you think. And that's really one of the things that was confirmed for me by reading this book, is that I'm doing that right. I may not be doing everything right, but I'm certainly doing that right. He talks about the 25 skills, which I've spoken about earlier, that aren't taught in school. And he talks and says that anything that you truly learn, that you really learn, but don't need or love, is lost. So these things that you learn but you don't use, you don't need, and you don't care about, they're going to be lost. And I know that's true because I've read some students' writings and they don't know how to use verbs, subject verb agreement. They don't know how to use a comma. They don't know how to use a period. They don't know when to capitalize. It's not important to them. They don't understand the importance of it. We're not engaging them when we're teaching them basic grammar skills. So, simply put, if you're curious about how something as massive and at times rigid as the educational system in the U.S. could undergo a substantial transformation, um, teachers like us, parents, administrators, people that make policy, and business leaders, really anybody who really loves a child, can walk away with some ideas to rediscover education, not as it is now, but as it could be. Some of the rules might be idealistic. Um, Other rules might be completely impossible, but he balances his world view with some real world sensibilities, like his Rule 19, have a well stocked library, and Rule 46, the future is portfolios, not transcripts. I don't think any of us can argue about that. Even if you don't agree with everything that Aldrich says, um, you could come away from this book assuredly thinking differently about some things. Some of the topics within the books are not quite yet developed, and some topics are basically completely overlooked, um, like providing for children with special needs or learning disabilities. But Unschooling Rules provides food for thought for anyone who wants the absolute best learning environments for our children. So Aldrich closes his book with a list of places to start, specific rules described in the book that have a direct implication for schools administrators, parents of children in traditional schools, and policymakers. And I would really encourage, and I would love for Dr. Strange to include this book in his next EDM class. I think it was helpful. It was an easy read, and it was full of information. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you will come away with the desire to read the book. I know I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed going back to it. Have a great night.